Hello, little dreamers. I'm Luna. Welcome to Luna Bedtime Story. Tonight, we'll journey into a world of gentle adventures, kind hearts, and peaceful dreams before we begin. If you'd like a new bedtime story waiting for you every week, don't forget to subscribe and join our cozy little family. Now, get comfortable, snuggle into your favorite blanket, and let's take 3 slow, deep breaths together. Breathe in and breathe out. Again. Breathe in and breathe out. One last time, breathe in and slowly breathe out. Let your shoulders relax. Close your eyes, let your thoughts drift away, and let the world grow quiet. Let's begin our story.
Medusa. Before the Stone. An original childhood retelling inspired by ancient myth. Chapter 1. The House Beside the Western Sea. Far beyond the roads of ordinary people, there was a shore at the western edge of the world. The sea beside that shore was deep and dark. During the day, its surface shone like blue glass. At night, it became almost black. Long waves rolled toward the land and broke softly against the rocks. The rocks were smooth because the water had touched them for thousands of years. Some were gray, others were green with moss. Small pools rested between them. Tiny silver fish lived in those pools, along with red crabs and pale shells. Above the shore stood a quiet house. The house had been built from stone gathered beside the sea. Its walls were thick enough to resist the winter wind. Its roof was covered with flat pieces of dark rock. Near the door grew a small garden of rosemary, thyme, and white flowers. This was the home of Perseus and Stheno. Perseus was an ancient spirit of the sea. His hair was the color of foam, and his eyes were gray. He knew where every deep channel ran beneath the water. He knew where storms slept and where lost ships rested. Stheno was also a spirit of the sea. Her long hair was dark green, like plants growing beneath the waves. Her voice was low and calm. When she sang, the seals came closer to the shore to listen. They had 3 daughters. The eldest was Stheno. Stheno was tall and strong. Even when she was young, she stood firmly during the strongest wind. She loved to climb the high rocks and watch storms moving across the sea. The second daughter was Euryale. Euryale had a bright laugh. She could imitate the calls of seabirds, and she often filled the house with music. She liked to collect shells and arrange them in circles on the floor. The youngest daughter was Medusa. Medusa was smaller than her sisters. She had gentle gray eyes and thick hair that shone gold in the sun. She moved carefully because she did not like stepping on flowers or frightening small creatures. On the morning of her birth, the sea had been unusually calm. Stheno carried the baby outside and sat beneath the rosemary bushes. Stheno and Euryale stood close to their mother. They looked down at their new sister with great interest. "She is very quiet," said Stheno. "She is listening," Euryale replied. The baby opened her eyes. A small moth had landed on the blanket around her. Its wings were white and soft. Medusa watched the moth without moving. When it flew away, she followed it with her eyes until it disappeared among the flowers. Stheno smiled. "She notices what other people miss," she said. Perseus stood behind them. He was not smiling. His silence made Stheno look up. "What troubles you?" she asked. Perseus looked at his 3 daughters. Stheno and Euryale were children of the ancient sea. Time would not weaken them. They would grow, but they would never become old. Medusa was different. She was mortal. To be mortal meant that she would change with passing years. She could become tired. She could be wounded. One day, after a long life or a short one, she would die. Her sisters would remain. Perseus had learned this truth from the deep places beneath the sea. He had hoped that the deep water was mistaken. The deep water was never mistaken. He knelt beside his youngest daughter. Medusa reached up and closed her tiny hand around one of his fingers. Perseus felt how warm and small she was. Perhaps being mortal will teach her to value every morning, Stheno said gently. Perseus looked toward the quiet sea. Perhaps, he answered. The sisters did not yet understand mortality. They only knew that Medusa was their little sister. They promised to protect her from cold winds, sharp rocks, and every shadow that came near the house. Medusa grew beneath their watchful care. When she learned to walk, Stheno held her left hand and Euryale held her right. They moved slowly along the sand. Medusa laughed whenever the water touched her toes. When she learned to speak, her first word was not mother or father. Her first word was home. The stone house was the first place she knew. The dark sea was the first song she heard. Her family was the first world she loved. She did not know that distant people would one day speak her name with fear. She did not know that storytellers would begin her life at its saddest moment. For now, she was only a child beside the sea. She was safe, she was loved, and she was innocent. Chapter 2: The Bird with the Broken Wing. Spring came slowly to the western shore. At first, small green leaves appeared between the stones, then yellow flowers opened along the hills. Finally, great flocks of birds returned from warmer lands. Medusa loved the spring birds. She often sat outside the house with a shallow wooden bowl in her lap. The bowl had been carved by Perseus from a piece of driftwood. Its surface was smooth, and small pictures of waves ran around its edge. Medusa filled the bowl with seeds. At first, the birds stayed far away. They watched her from the branches of a bent olive tree. Medusa remained still. She spoke to them in a soft voice. "You may come closer," she said. "I will not hurt you." One bird crossed the garden. Then another came. Soon, small brown birds were hopping around Medusa's feet. They lifted the seeds from the bowl and carried them away. Medusa returned every morning. Because she was mortal, she sometimes became cold. She sometimes became hungry. Her arms grew tired if she held the bowl for too long. Her sisters did not understand these things. Stheno could stand in the cold rain without shaking. Euryale could run along the shore from sunrise until sunset without becoming tired. Medusa did not envy them. She was pleased that they were strong. Her own weakness made her careful with weaker creatures. One windy afternoon, Medusa walked beyond the garden. The path led toward a field of long grass. The grass bent beneath the wind like water. Medusa heard a faint sound. It was not the cry of a healthy bird. It was thin and uneven. She followed it. Near a thorn bush, she found a young gull lying on the ground. A gull was a white seabird with long wings. It needed those wings to rise above the water and search for fish. This gull's left wing hung at a strange angle. One of the thorns had caught beneath its feathers. The bird opened its beak when Medusa came near. "I know you are afraid," she said. She removed her blue cloak. The cloak was made from soft wool. Stheno had woven it to protect Medusa from the cold. Medusa placed it over the gull so that the bird would not injure itself while struggling. Then she carefully freed the wing. Stheno found her kneeling in the grass. "What are you doing?" Stheno asked. "This bird is hurt. Leave it," said Stheno. "The wild world is full of wounded things." Medusa looked up at her sister. "That is why we must help when we can." Stheno did not answer. She lifted the gull with hands far stronger than Medusa's. Together, the sisters carried it home. Stheno examined the damaged wing. She cut 2 thin pieces of wood. These pieces were called splints. A splint held an injured bone still so that it could heal. Medusa covered the wood with cloth. Stheno placed the splints beside the wing and tied them gently. For many days, Medusa cared for the bird. She brought it water in a small shell. She gave it pieces of fish. Every evening, she cleaned the straw in its basket. The gull watched her closely. It no longer opened its beak in fear when she approached. One morning, Stheno removed the splints. The gull stretched its wing. At first, the wing trembled. Then it became steady. Medusa carried the bird to the shore. Her family came with her. Even Perseus left the deep water to watch. Medusa opened her arms. The gull remained on her hands. "You are free," she said. The bird lifted its wings. It rose into the air and circled above the family. Sunlight shone through its white feathers. Euryale clapped. Stheno smiled, though she tried to hide it. The gull flew toward the bright horizon. Medusa watched until it became a white point above the sea. That evening, Stheno sat beside her youngest sister. "You knew the bird might not live," she said. "Yes." "You knew it might be frightened of you." "Yes." "You helped it anyway." Medusa nodded. Stheno looked toward the place where the bird had disappeared. "You are braver than you seem," she said. Medusa leaned against her sister. She did not think of herself as brave. She had only seen a creature in pain. She had wanted its pain to end. Years later, people would describe Medusa as a creature without mercy. They would say her heart was hard and cold. None of those storytellers would mention the gull. The gull could not speak for her. But every spring, it returned to the western shore. It rested on the roof of the stone house. And when it saw Medusa, it sang. Chapter 3: The First Human Boat. Medusa was still young when the first human boat reached the western shore. She saw it early one morning. The sky was pale pink. Mist floated above the water. The boat appeared slowly through the mist, like a dark leaf. A boat was rare in that distant part of the world. The sea was difficult to cross. Hidden rocks waited beneath the surface, and strong currents pulled carelessly guided ships away from land. This boat was small. Its mast had broken during a storm. A mast was the tall wooden pole that held a ship's sail. Without it, the boat could not use the wind to travel. 3 fishermen sat inside. They were ordinary men from a village far to the east. Their clothes were wet. Their hands were covered with small cuts. They had not eaten for 2 days. Medusa ran to the house. "A boat has come," she said. Perseus stepped outside. His expression became serious when he saw the fishermen. "We should guide them away," he said. "They need help," Medusa answered. "Humans fear what they do not understand. They are cold." They may bring danger. They are cold now, Medusa repeated. Stheno looked at her youngest daughter. Medusa's face was full of concern. She was not thinking about future danger. She saw only 3 tired people in a damaged boat. Stheno placed bread, dried fish, and clean water in a basket. "Take this," she said. Perseus did not stop them. He walked ahead and guided the boat around the hidden rocks. When the fishermen reached the shore, they stared at the family. Perseus and Stheno looked strange to human eyes. Their clothes shone like wet scales. Stheno and Euryale were taller than ordinary women. Their faces were beautiful, but their strength could be seen in the way they moved. Medusa looked almost human. Her golden hair hung in a long braid. She carried the basket with both arms. The oldest fisherman was named Theron. He had a gray beard and tired brown eyes. He was the first to step from the boat. His legs shook when his feet touched the sand. Medusa offered him the basket. "There is food inside," she said. Theron looked at her suspiciously. "Why would you help us?" "Because you need help." He waited. Medusa did not ask for anything. At last he accepted the basket. The fishermen stayed near the shore for 3 days. Stheno repaired the broken mast. She found a straight tree on the hillside and carried the trunk down herself. Euryale repaired the torn sail. A sail was a wide sheet of cloth that caught the wind and moved a boat forward. She used strong thread made from seagrass. Medusa prepared simple meals. She asked the fishermen about their village. Theron described houses with red roofs, narrow streets, and a market beside the harbor. Medusa had never seen a market. Theron explained that it was a place where people gathered to exchange food, cloth, tools, and stories. He told her about tables covered with oranges and jars of honey. He described musicians playing near the well. "It sounds beautiful," Medusa said. "It can be," Theron replied. On the 4th morning, the boat was ready. The fishermen pushed it into the water. Before leaving, Theron gave Medusa a small bronze bell. The bell was an ordinary object from his boat. It was shaped like a tiny cup. A loose piece of metal hung inside it. When Medusa moved the bell, the metal struck the sides and made a clear sound. "This guided us through fog," Theron said. "You should have it." Medusa held it carefully. "Thank you." Theron entered the boat. As the fishermen sailed away, Medusa rang the little bell. Its voice traveled across the calm sea. She believed the men would remember her kindness. Theron did remember. Yet memories change when they are carried over long distances. When he reached his village, the people asked where he had been. Theron told them about the shore at the edge of the world. He told them about the powerful daughters of the sea. Some people listened with wonder. Others listened with fear. "Were they monsters?" one man asked. "No," Theron said. "They saved us." "But they were not human?" "No." "Then they must have wanted something." "They asked for nothing." The listeners did not understand kindness that asked for nothing. That kind of kindness made them uneasy. The next storyteller said, the Sea family had repaired a ship because they wanted sailors to return. Another storyteller said the sisters used sweet food to trap lost men. Soon, no one spoke of the warm bread Medusa had carried. They spoke only of a strange girl on a distant shore. Medusa knew nothing about these stories. She kept the bronze bell beside her bed. On misty mornings, She rang it for lost boats. The sound was small, but it was clear. It said, "There is land here." It said, "You are not alone." Chapter 4. The Village of Red Roofs. As Medusa grew older, she often thought about Theron's village. She imagined the narrow streets and the harbor market. She imagined baskets of fruit and jars of golden honey. Most of all, she imagined the people. She had met only 3 humans. She wanted to understand the rest. One autumn morning, Stheno agreed to travel with her. The journey took several days. They followed the eastern coast, staying near the water. Medusa carried a cloth bag containing bread, a comb, and the bronze bell. The comb was made of polished bone. Its teeth were wide and smooth. Stheno had given it to Medusa because her golden hair had grown very long. They reached the village in the evening. The first thing Medusa noticed was the smell of wood smoke. The houses stood close together. Their walls were pale, and their roofs were covered with red clay tiles. Lamps glowed behind small windows. The harbor rested below the village. Wooden boats were tied to stone posts. Nets hung from poles to dry. The market stood around a round well at the center of the village. Medusa felt as if she had entered one of Theron's stories. Stheno placed a hood over her green hair. "People may look at us," she warned. Medusa also covered her hair. They walked toward the market. At first, no one noticed them. A baker sold round loaves of bread. A farmer had arranged red apples in neat rows. An old woman sat behind jars of honey. Medusa stopped at the honey table. The old woman introduced herself as Maya. Maya had a round face and silver hair. Her hands moved slowly because her fingers were stiff with age. "Would you like to taste it?" Maya asked. Medusa nodded. Maya placed a drop of honey on a small wooden spoon. The honey came from bees that lived in boxes outside the village. It tasted of summer flowers. Medusa smiled. "It is wonderful." Maya smiled back. For a few quiet moments they were simply an old woman and a curious girl. Then a child pulled the hood from Medusa's head. Her golden hair fell over her shoulders. People turned to look. Medusa had never understood why humans found her hair remarkable. To her it was only hair. Yet it caught the evening light and shone warmly. A man near the well recognized her. He had heard Theron's tale. "She comes from the western shore," he said. The market became quiet. Medusa looked around. Some faces showed wonder. Some showed fear. A few showed anger. Theron walked out of a nearby house. He saw Medusa and hurried toward her. "She helped me," he told the crowd. "Her family saved my life." A merchant shook his head. "Why has she come here?" "To see the village," Medusa said. Her simple answer did not satisfy him. "Perhaps she has come to lead others here." Stheno moved closer to her daughter. "We mean no harm." The merchant stared at Stheno's unusual eyes. He stepped back. That movement spread through the crowd. One person stepped back, then another. Soon, a wide empty circle surrounded Medusa and her mother. Medusa had never stood inside such a circle. It felt colder than winter wind. Maya remained beside her table. She held out a small jar of honey. "For your journey home," she said. Medusa accepted it. "Thank you." Theron wanted them to stay, but Stheno knew the visit had ended. They left the village before nightfall. For a long time, Medusa said nothing. The road followed the shore. Waves moved gently beside them. The first stars appeared above the water. "Did I do something wrong?" Medusa finally asked. "No," Stheno answered. "Then why were they afraid?" "Because they had heard a story about you before they met you." "But the story was not true. Fear does not always wait for truth." Medusa thought about the empty circle. Will they change the story now? Some may. And the others? Stheno looked toward the distant village. The others may shape what they saw to fit what they already believed. Medusa carried Maya's jar all the way home. She placed it beside the bronze bell. The bell reminded her that people could be grateful. The honey reminded her that one gentle person could remain kind, even when a whole crowd stepped away. Medusa did not begin to hate humans. She continued to hope that they would understand her. Her innocence was not foolishness. She simply believed that truth should be stronger than fear. She had not yet learned how often fear speaks first. Chapter 5: The Garden of the Quiet Temple. Several years passed. Medusa grew into a young woman. Her kindness remained, but it became quieter. She did not run toward strangers as freely as she once had. She watched their faces first. She still cared for wounded birds. She still rang the bronze bell during fog. She still placed seeds in the wooden bowl each spring. Her golden hair grew past her waist. Sailors began telling stories about it. Some said it was made from stolen sunlight. Others said each strand could bind a ship. A few said Medusa used her beauty to draw travelers toward hidden rocks. Medusa had never drawn a ship toward danger. She had guided many ships away from it. Yet no sailor returned home with a dramatic tale about a quiet rescue. Stories about danger traveled faster. One spring, Medusa decided to spend a season at a temple. The temple stood on a high hill above a city. It was dedicated to Athena, a goddess associated with wisdom, craft, and the defense of cities. The building was made from pale stone. Tall columns surrounded it. A column was a carved stone support that held up the roof. From a distance, the columns looked like a row of white trees. Behind the temple was a garden. Olive trees gave shade to the paths. Gray-green leaves whispered whenever the wind passed through them. A clear fountain stood in the center. Medusa came because she wanted to learn. The women who cared for the temple kept a library of scrolls. A scroll was a long sheet of writing material rolled around a wooden rod. The scrolls contained poems, histories, prayers, and lessons about the stars. An elderly keeper named Ianthe welcomed Medusa. Ianthe was small and thin. She wore a plain white robe. Her black hair had turned almost entirely silver. She did not ask Medusa to explain the stories about the western shore. She asked only one question. "Why have you come?" "To learn how stories are kept," Medusa answered. Ianthe studied her face. "That is a wise reason." Medusa stayed in a little room beside the garden. The room contained a narrow bed, a wooden chest, and a lamp. The lamp was a small clay bowl filled with oil. A thread rested in the oil and burned with a steady flame. Each morning, Medusa swept the temple steps. Then she helped Ianthe in the library. She learned to read different forms of writing. She learned how to mix ink from soot and water. She learned how to repair torn scrolls with thin strips of cloth. Medusa loved the quiet work. One afternoon, she found a scroll about the dangers of the Western Sea. The writer described 3 cruel sisters who waited beyond the known world. According to the scroll, the sisters hated people and filled the shore with bones. Medusa read the passage twice. There were no bones around her home. There were shells, flowers, and smooth stones. There was a bowl for birds and a basket where a gull had healed. She carried the scroll to Ianthe. "This describes my sisters and me," Medusa said. Ianthe read the passage. "Do you know who wrote it?" Medusa asked. "No. Did the writer visit our shore? I do not think so." "Then why is it here?" "Because someone repeated the tale. Another person wrote it down. Once words are written, people often treat them as truth." Medusa touched the edge of the scroll. "Can we correct it? We can add another account." Together, they prepared a clean sheet. Medusa wrote about the stone house and the Western Sea. She wrote about Stheno repairing the fisherman's mast. She wrote about Euryale sewing their sail. She did not praise herself. She only recorded what had happened. Ianthe placed the new account beside the old one. "Will people believe mine?" Medusa asked. "Some will. That does not sound like enough. It is still worth doing." Medusa remained in the garden until the season ended. Before she left, Ianthe gave her a plain clay lamp. "Carry a light when others choose darkness," the old woman said. Medusa wrapped the lamp in cloth and placed it in her bag. The words stayed with her. As she walked home, she imagined future readers opening her scroll. She imagined them discovering that the feared sisters had names, voices, and a home. Perhaps they would understand. Perhaps they would carry the kinder story into the world. Medusa did not know that the harsher tale would be copied again and again. The cruel sisters were more exciting than the gentle ones. The bones that had never existed became part of every telling. The truth remained in the library. It was quiet, but it was not gone. Chapter 6. The day her hair awoke. The day Medusa's life changed began with warm sunlight. The temple garden was calm. Tiny white flowers grew beside the fountain. Bees moved among them. Medusa had returned to visit Ianthe. She came carrying a basket of sea herbs for the old keeper. The herbs had narrow leaves and a clean scent. Stheno used them to make tea for tired people. Medusa entered the library. Ianthe was not there. Another keeper explained that the old woman had become ill and was resting in the city. Medusa left the basket beside her lamp. She walked into the garden alone. A silence settled over the temple. It was not the gentle silence of reading. It was the heavy silence that comes before a storm. The air grew cold. Medusa stopped beside the fountain. A divine presence entered the garden. The old myths describe gods as powerful beings whose choices could change mortal lives. Humans honored them, but humans also feared them. The gods did not always explain their reasons, and their judgments were not always kind. Medusa felt that power around her. She knew she was small before it. A sudden wind crossed the garden. The trees bent. Water rose from the fountain and fell back in silver drops. The temple doors closed with a deep sound. Medusa lifted her hands to protect her face. Pain moved across her head. It began near her forehead. Then it passed through every strand of her hair. She fell to her knees. Her golden hair twisted. Each lock became heavier. The strands divided and moved with lives of their own. Scales appeared where the gold had once shone. Medusa reached up. A small serpent rested against her hand. A serpent was a long, legless creature covered with scales. Some people feared serpents because certain kinds carried poison. These serpents did not bite Medusa. They were part of her now, joined to her pain and fear. More serpents lifted their heads. They were green, bronze, gray, and black. Some were no longer than a finger. Others curled around her shoulders. Medusa stared into the fountain. Her reflection looked back. Her face was still her own, but it carried a terrible new power. A bird landed beside the water. The bird looked directly at her. In one breath, its soft body became gray stone. Medusa cried out. She reached for it, but the serpents hissed. Her fingers touched a cold stone wing. "No," Medusa whispered. She did not understand the power in her eyes. She only knew that an innocent creature had been changed because it looked at her. Medusa tore a strip of cloth from her robe. She wrapped it around her eyes. Darkness covered her. She knelt beside the stone bird and wept. When the temple doors opened, the keepers found her there. They saw the serpents moving around her head. They saw the bird of stone. They did not ask what had happened. They ran. Their cries reached the city. "The monster is in the temple." Medusa remained beside the fountain. The word entered her heart more sharply than the transformation itself. Monster. She had heard people use that word for creatures with no kindness in them. She had heard it used for beings who enjoyed suffering. Medusa had never enjoyed suffering. She was covering her eyes so that no one else would be harmed. Guards climbed the hill. Their bronze shields caught the sunlight. Their spears were long wooden poles with sharp metal points. The weapons were meant to protect the city. Medusa heard them approaching. "She has attacked the temple," one guard said. "I did not," Medusa called. The guard stopped. Her voice surprised them. A monster was not expected to sound frightened. "Show us your face," their leader ordered. "I cannot." "Then you are hiding your guilt. My eyes may hurt you." The guards misunderstood her warning. They believed it was a threat, one through his spear. Medusa heard it moving through the air. She turned aside. The spear struck the fountain and broke a piece from its rim. Medusa ran. She knew every path in the garden. Even without sight, she remembered where the stones turned and where the olive roots rose from the ground. She reached the back wall and felt along its surface. A tree grew close to the wall. She climbed its branches and crossed to the other side. Behind her, the guards shouted. No one followed immediately. The stories had already begun. By sunset, people said Medusa had entered the temple to challenge a goddess. By midnight, people said she had changed 100 birds into stone. By morning, people said she had attacked the guards and filled the garden with statues. There had been one bird. Medusa had not attacked anyone. She had run because she wanted the guards to live. But the city needed a simple story. A beautiful woman had entered the temple. A monster had left it. Everything between those two moments was forgotten. Chapter 7. The road walked in darkness. Medusa traveled west with cloth around her eyes. The road was long. It crossed dry hills and open fields. It moved between villages where dogs barked behind wooden fences. It passed wells where travelers stopped for water. Medusa avoided crowded places. She walked at night whenever she could. Moonlight was gentle, and fewer people used the road after sunset. The serpents helped her. At first, Medusa had feared them. She believed they were signs that her old self had been erased. Yet the serpents were living creatures. They had not chosen what had happened to her. They became her eyes. When a low branch crossed the road, the serpents moved away from it. When stones lay in her path, they leaned in another direction. Medusa learned to read their small movements. The bronze serpent above her right ear was calm and watchful. She called him Theros. A small green serpent near her neck was curious. She called her Chloris. The darkest serpent was shy. He hid beneath the others whenever strangers came near. Medusa named him Nox, after the night. Giving them names changed something. They were no longer a punishment without shape. They were frightened lives joined to her own frightened life. During the 5th night of her journey, Medusa heard crying. The sound came from a field beside the road. She stopped. A child was calling for his mother. Medusa followed the voice. The serpents guided her between the tall plants. She found a little boy sitting beside an overturned cart. A cart was a wooden platform with wheels. Farmers used it to carry food and tools. One wheel had broken, and the cart had fallen into a ditch. The boy's name was Linus. He was 6 years old. His mother had gone to find help, but darkness had come before she returned. "Who are you?" he asked. "My name is Medusa." Linus became silent. He knew that name. People were already telling stories about the monster from the temple. "My father says you turn people to stone." "He is right," Medusa said quietly. "That is why my eyes are covered. Are you going to hurt me?" "No." "Why not?" "Because I do not want to hurt anyone." Linus thought for a moment. Monsters want to hurt people. Sometimes people use that word for anyone they fear. Medusa felt along the broken cart. Its axle had cracked. The axle was the wooden bar connecting its wheels. She could not repair it. She sat several steps away from Linus. "I will wait until your mother returns," she said. The night became colder. Medusa removed her cloak and placed it on the ground between them. "You may take it." Linus pulled the cloak around his shoulders. For a long time, they listened to the insects in the field. "Do the snakes have names?" Linus asked. "Yes." Medusa introduced them one by one. Linus laughed when Chloris tried to investigate the cloak. The sound was warm and ordinary. Near dawn, voices came from the road. Linus's mother arrived with 3 farmers. She ran into the field and held her son. Then she saw Medusa. Her face changed. Medusa stood slowly. "Your son is safe," she said. The farmers raised their tools. Linus stepped between them and Medusa. "She helped me." His mother pulled him back. "Do not look at her. She kept her eyes covered all night." Medusa picked up her bag. She left the cloak with Linus. As she walked away, she heard him telling the adults what had happened. For a little while, she felt hopeful. Yet the story changed before it reached the next village. People said Medusa had found a child alone in a field. They said she had wrapped him in a dark cloak. They said she had been preparing to carry him away when his mother arrived. Linus repeated the truth. Few adults listened. He was only a child. Medusa was already a monster in their minds. Each new tale had to fit the old one. Kindness became a trick. Mercy became a threat. Warnings became promises of violence. Medusa continued walking west. The cloth around her eyes grew wet with tears, but she did not remove it. She protected even the people who lied about her. That choice was not weakness. It was the strongest part of her. Chapter 8: The Island of Stone Flowers. Medusa returned to the edge of the world. Her family welcomed her beside the sea. Stheno saw the cloth around Medusa's eyes and approached carefully. Euryale heard the soft movement of the serpents. Neither sister ran. Stheno lifted her hands to Medusa's face. "My child," she whispered. Medusa told them what had happened. She described the temple garden. She described the stone bird and the frightened guards. She explained how every telling had turned her fear into cruelty. Stheno became angry. "Let them come," she said. "I will show them something worth fearing." "No," Medusa answered, "they hunted you. I will not become the creature they describe." Euryale took Medusa's hand. "You are still our sister." Those words brought Medusa more comfort than any promise of revenge. The family left the stone house. Too many sailors now knew where it stood. Some came seeking proof of the terrible stories. Others came hoping to kill the monster and become famous. Perseus guided them to a hidden island. The island rose from the sea beyond a wall of mist. Dark cliffs surrounded it. Only one narrow channel led to its shore. Inside the cliffs was a quiet valley. Grass grew beneath tall trees. A stream crossed the valley and entered a clear lake. Wildflowers covered the open ground. Medusa chose a cave near the lake. The cave was not cold or empty. Sunlight entered through a wide opening. The walls were pale and smooth. A bed of moss grew near the back. Stheno built a wooden screen across one corner so Medusa could rest in privacy. Euryale hung small shells from the ceiling. They made gentle music when the wind entered. Stheno planted sea herbs near the entrance. Perseus placed warning stones along the channel. The stones were tall and white. He carved words into them. "Turn back. No treasure waits here. Let the island rest." The warning was clear. Still, people came. Some wanted treasure. Some wanted glory. Some wanted to see whether the stories were true. Medusa always called to them before they entered the valley. "Please leave," she said. "It is not safe to look at me." Many listened. A few did not. The first man to ignore the warning carried a sword. He entered the cave while Medusa slept. Theros woke her by striking his tail against the stone. Medusa sat up. The cloth had slipped from one eye. The man raised his sword. For one brief moment, their eyes met. Stone spread across him. His sword became stone before it reached the ground. Medusa rushed forward, although she knew she could do nothing. The man stood frozen near the entrance. His face still showed anger. Stheno found Medusa beside him. "He came to kill you," she said. "I did not want this." Stheno touched her sister's shoulder. "I know." They moved the stone figure outside. Medusa planted flowers around his feet. More intruders came over the years. Some entered with nets, others carried spears. One brought a heavy chain because he planned to drag Medusa back to his city. Each saw the warning stones. Each heard Medusa telling him to leave. Some statues stood with weapons raised, others stood with hands reaching toward imaginary treasure. Medusa planted flowers around all of them. White flowers grew beside those who had come for glory. Blue flowers grew beside those sent by kings. Yellow flowers grew beside the curious. The valley slowly became a garden of stone figures. Visitors later claimed that Medusa displayed the statues as signs of her power. They did not notice the flowers. They did not know that she remembered every name she had heard. They did not know she sat among the statues and wished that each person had turned back. Medusa became more isolated. She no longer rang the bronze bell for ships. Sailors might follow it to the island. She no longer placed her bird bowl outside. Birds might look into her uncovered eyes while she slept. She kept Ianthe's clay lamp burning in the cave. Its flame was small. Medusa sat beside it in the evening and listened to her sisters. Euryale sang the songs of their childhood. Stheno described the clouds she had seen over the sea. Stheno made tea from the herbs near the cave. In those quiet hours, Medusa was not a monster. She was a daughter and a sister. She was the girl who had once carried a wounded gull home. Outside the island, however, storytellers counted the statues. They did not count the warnings that had been ignored. Chapter 9. The Young Man with the Mirrored Shield. A king named Polydectes heard the tales about Medusa. He lived on an island far to the east. His palace stood above a busy harbor, and its halls were filled with expensive objects. Polydectes desired control. He often sent other people into danger while he remained safe at home. A young man named Perseus stood in his way. Perseus was brave, but he was also inexperienced. He loved his mother and wanted to protect her. Polydectes used that love against him. The king ordered Perseus to bring him the head of Medusa. The task sounded impossible. That was why the king chose it. Perseus received divine gifts for the journey. One gift was a curved sword sharp enough to cut through great strength. Another was a helmet that hid the person wearing it. The most important gift was a polished shield. A shield was a broad piece of metal carried on the arm. It usually protected a warrior from spears and arrows. This shield had been polished until its inner surface reflected the world like still water. Perseus could use it as a mirror. He could see Medusa without looking directly into her eyes. After a long journey, he reached the hidden island. He passed the warning stones. He read the words carved upon them. He continued. The valley appeared calm beneath the moon. Flowers moved gently around the stone figures. Perseus studied the statues. He had been told that they were heroes, defeated by a cruel monster. He did not know that many had been thieves and hunters. He did not know that Medusa had begged them to leave. Near midnight, Perseus entered the cave. The clay lamp was burning. Its small light touched the shell decorations above the bed. A wooden bowl rested beside the wall. The old bronze bell stood near the lamp. Perseus had expected bones and weapons. He found the possessions of an ordinary life. Medusa slept on the bed of moss. Her face was peaceful. The serpents rested around her head. Some were curled together for warmth. Perseus lifted the shield. In its reflection, he saw someone who looked tired rather than cruel. He hesitated. Medusa began to dream. In her dream, she was a child again. Stheno held one hand, and Euryale held the other. They walked along the shore while the morning sun rose. The bronze bell rang. Perseus had touched it with his foot. Medusa woke. "Who is there?" she asked. Perseus became still. His helmet hid him from sight. Medusa sat up. Her eyes remained closed. "You have entered a dangerous place," she said. "Leave before I open my eyes." Perseus tightened his hand around the sword. The monster was warning him. That detail did not fit the story he had been told. "Were you sent by a king?" Medusa asked. Perseus said nothing. "Many have been sent by kings. They promise honor, but they do not come themselves." Her voice was calm. Perseus thought about Polydectes sitting safely inside his palace. For a moment, the young man understood. Medusa was not waiting to hunt him. She was trying to protect him. Yet Perseus also thought of his mother. If he returned without Medusa's head, the king would still threaten her. His fear and duty were stronger than his doubt. Medusa turned toward the sound of his breathing. One of her eyes began to open. Perseus looked into the shield. He raised the sword. The ancient stories remember the blow. They remember the hero's victory. They remember the winged horse, Pegasus and Chrysaor, emerging after Medusa's death. They remember Perseus carrying her head away and using its power against his enemies. Fewer stories remain beside Medusa in the final moment. Fewer ask what she knew or felt. In this telling, her last thought was not of revenge. It was of her sisters. She hoped they would not enter the cave and look upon the hidden warrior. The sword fell. The bronze bell rang once more. Its clear voice passed through the cave and entered the valley. Stheno and Euryale heard it. They ran toward their sister, but the helmet concealed Perseus. With winged speed, he escaped across the dark sea. The sisters found the lamp still burning. They found the wooden bowl. They found Medusa's final warning, written in the way she had lived. She had kept her eyes closed. Even at the end, she had tried not to harm the person who came to harm her. Chapter 10. The Story Beneath the Story. The tale of Perseus spread quickly. Singers performed it in royal halls. Poets repeated it in busy markets. Parents told smaller versions beside evening fires. Perseus became the brave young hero. Medusa became the terrible monster. The story was simple that way. Simple stories are easy to remember. Few singers began with the house beside the western sea. They did not describe the smooth rocks or the garden of rosemary. They did not mention Stheno and Euryale holding their little sister's hands. No poet sang about the bird with the broken wing. No statue showed Medusa kneeling in the grass while Stheno tied small splints around a gull's injury. The fisherman's rescue disappeared. The bronze bell became treasure taken from a victim, although it had been a gift. The village market disappeared. Maya's jar of honey was forgotten. Medusa's season in the temple library became a tale about pride. Her wish to preserve the truth became a warning against vanity. The road she walked in darkness vanished. Linus grew into an old man. He continued telling his children that Medusa had protected him in the field. His children believed him. Other people did not. They preferred the story in which he had escaped her. The island's warning stones were covered by moss. Travelers described them as monuments to Medusa's victims. No one cleaned the carvings to read what they truly said. The flowers around the statues continued to bloom. No song explained who had planted them. After Medusa's death, her image appeared on shields, doors, walls, and temples. People believed her face could frighten evil away. This was a strange ending. The woman called a monster became a guardian. Her face protected the same world that had feared her. Her name itself came to carry the sense of guarding or protecting, although storytellers often remembered only destruction. n.wikipedia.org s. scienceinsights.org. Stheno and Euryale remained on the hidden island. They were immortal, but immortality did not protect them from grief. Stheno cared for the flowers. Euryale kept the clay lamp burning. Stheno returned often to the cave. She placed fresh sea herbs beside Medusa's wooden bowl. Perseus stood near the shore each evening. He watched the horizon as he had watched it on the morning of Medusa's birth. One spring, a white gull crossed the sea. It was not the same gull Medusa had once saved. Many years had passed. It may have been the child of that bird, or the child of its child. The gull landed near the cave. Stheno placed seeds in the old wooden bowl. The bird ate without fear. Euryale sat beside her sister. "Do you think anyone will remember who she truly was?" she asked. Stheno looked at the flowers. "Not everyone. Is that enough?" "It must be." The sisters carried Medusa's possessions back to the stone house. They placed the bronze bell beside the western window. They set Ianthe's lamp on the table. They put the wooden bird bowl outside. Years became centuries. The stone house slowly fell into ruin. The roof disappeared. Grass covered the floor. Only part of one wall remained. The bell rested beneath the earth. For a long time, no hand found it. Still, small truths traveled quietly through the world. A grandmother told a child that Medusa had once been innocent. A painter gave the feared face sad eyes. A poet wondered why the person punished in the story was not the most powerful person in it. A traveler looked at an old image of Medusa and saw pain rather than cruelty. These small questions became another kind of bell. They called through the fog of old stories. They asked people to look again. To look again did not mean pretending Medusa's power was harmless. Her gaze turned living beings into stone. The valley had been filled with silent figures, but power and intention were not the same. Medusa did not choose the gaze. She covered her eyes because she understood its danger. She gave warnings. She hid herself. She asked strangers to turn back. The story called her cruel because cruelty was easier to explain than sorrow. It called her vain because innocence made her punishment uncomfortable. It called her a monster because then no one had to ask whether a monster had been made from a gentle person. Beneath that loud story, another story remained. It was the story of a mortal girl in an immortal family. Because she was mortal, she understood weakness. Because she understood weakness, she cared for wounded things. She fed birds. She welcomed lost fishermen. She wanted to learn. She wrote the truth when she discovered a lie. She gave her cloak to a frightened child. She planted flowers around the people she could not save. She closed her eyes to protect those who came to kill her. The world remembered the serpents. Her sisters remembered her hands. The world remembered the stone. Her mother remembered her first word. The world remembered the monster at the end. Her family remembered the child at the beginning, and perhaps that is why her story has never become completely still. Stone does not breathe. Stone does not change. Yet Medusa's story continues to change whenever someone asks what came before the hero entered the cave. On calm nights, when mist lies over the western sea, some travelers say they hear a bell. The sound is faint. It comes from a shore beyond the oldest road. No one knows whether the bell is real. Some believe it is only the wind moving through broken stone. Others believe that old objects remember the hands that held them. The bell rings only once. Its voice is clear and gentle. It does not threaten anyone. It does not call ships toward danger. It asks the lost to notice the land. It asks the frightened to listen before judging. Most of all, it asks every storyteller to begin earlier, not with the sword, not with the serpents, not with the gaze that turned life into stone. It asks them to begin beside the quiet western sea, where a little girl held out a bowl of seeds and waited patiently for the birds to understand that she meant them no harm. That little girl was Medusa. She was not born inside a hero's adventure. She had a home before she became a warning. She had a voice before others spoke for her. She had a story before they called her a villain. And underneath every frightening tale told about her, that innocent child is waiting still. She is waiting beside the rosemary. She is listening to the waves. She is watching a white moth rise from her blanket. And she is asking in the quiet voice that legends nearly buried, "Will you remember me from the beginning?" Of course. The first 10 chapters ended Medusa's life, but her truth had not yet reached the wider world. The final chapters continue through the people who remembered her, the record she left behind, and the quiet way her real story survived. Medusa, before the stone. 11. The boy who remembered many years had passed since Medusa found Linus beside the broken cart. Linus was no longer a frightened boy in a dark field. He had become an old man. He lived in a small house near the village where he had grown up. The house stood at the end of a narrow road. Its walls were made from pale stones, and its roof was covered with red tiles. Behind the house was a garden. Linus grew beans, onions, and healing herbs there. A fig tree stood near the back wall. During summer, its broad leaves gave shade to a wooden bench. Linus often sat on that bench in the evening. His hair had become white. His hands had become stiff with age. Yet his eyes were still bright, and his memory remained clear. He had 3 grandchildren. The eldest was a quiet girl named Thalia. She enjoyed listening to stories, but she always asked whether they were true. The second was a cheerful boy named Milo. He collected smooth stones and kept them in small cloth bags. The youngest was named Cora. She was still very small. She often fell asleep before Linus finished speaking. One warm evening, the children gathered beneath the fig tree. The sun had nearly disappeared. Golden light rested on the garden wall. Small insects moved among the flowers. Milo carried a shield made from an old basket lid. "I am Perseus," he announced. He raised the basket lid and held a wooden spoon like a sword. Cora clapped. Thalia did not. "Who are you fighting?" she asked. "Medusa." "Why?" "Because she was a monster." Linus looked up from the basket of beans in his lap. The beans had dried in the sun. Their shells were hard and pale. He had been separating the good seeds from the damaged ones so they could be planted in spring. "Who told you that?" he asked. Milo lowered his wooden spoon. "Everyone knows it." Linus placed the basket beside him. "Everyone knows the famous story," he said. "That does not mean everyone knows the whole story." The children came closer. Linus pointed toward an old wooden chest near the garden door. A chest was a strong box used to protect valuable objects. This one had iron hinges and a simple lock. The wood had become dark with age. "Thalia, please bring me the chest." Thalia carried it carefully. Linus took a small key from a cord around his neck. He opened the lock and lifted the lid. Inside the chest lay a folded cloak. The cloak was dark blue. Its edges were worn, and one side had been repaired with gray thread. Even after so many years, Linus had kept it safe. "This belonged to Medusa," he said. Milo stared at the cloth. "The monster?" "The woman," Linus corrected gently. "The woman named Medusa." He lifted the cloak. "When I was 6 years old, the wheel of my mother's cart broke. I was left alone in a field after sunset. Medusa heard me crying." "Did she look at you?" Thalia asked. "No. Her eyes were covered." "Were there snakes in her hair?" Milo asked. "Yes." Milo moved closer rather than stepping away. "What did they look like?" "Some were green, some were bronze. One little snake kept trying to crawl beneath this cloak." Cora touched the cloth. "Was it cold?" "The night was cold," Linus said. "Medusa gave me the cloak so I could stay warm." "Did she try to take you?" Milo asked. "No." "Did she threaten your mother?" "No." "Did she turn anyone to stone?" "No." Milo looked confused. "But the storytellers say she was cruel." "Storytellers say many things. Why would they tell a lie?" Linus did not answer at once. He looked toward the evening sky. The first star had appeared. "Some people did not know the truth," he said. They repeated what they had heard. Others were afraid of Medusa. Fear made the false story feel true to them. "What did Medusa say to you?" She said people sometimes call someone a monster simply because they are afraid. Did you believe her? Not at first. Linus placed his hand on the old cloak. Then I watched her sit in the darkness all night. She never removed the cloth from her eyes. She kept me company, even though she knew my family might hurt her when they returned. He looked at Milo's basket shield and wooden spoon. Medusa had many chances to harm me. She chose to protect me instead. Milo slowly placed the spoon on the ground. Was Perseus bad? He asked. That is not a simple question, but he killed her. Yes. Then he must have been bad. Perseus was sent by a cruel king, Linus explained. He believed he had to complete a dangerous task to protect his mother. That does not make what happened to Medusa fair. It means that one person's fear was used against another person's life. Thalia sat beside the chest. Did Perseus know the truth about her? I do not know. Would it have changed what he did? I do not know that either. Linus folded the cloak. There will be many things we cannot know. That is why we must be careful with the things we claim to know. The children became quiet. A breeze moved through the fig leaves. Milo looked at the stones he had collected that morning. He usually imagined they were people turned to stone by Medusa. Now they seemed different. Perhaps they were simply stones. Perhaps the figures in the famous stories had also been people who ignored warnings. What happened to Medusa's family? Thalia asked. I do not know, Linus replied. But I have often wondered, do you think they are still alive? Her sisters were said to be immortal. Then they might remember everything. Linus nodded. That is what I hope. The children helped him place the cloak inside the chest. Before closing the lid, Linus added a written page. He had learned to write when he was young. His letters were uneven now because his fingers trembled. The page described the night in the field. It explained that Medusa had kept her eyes covered. It explained that she had given her cloak to a cold child. It explained that she had asked for nothing in return. Linus had written the account many years earlier. He read it again each spring to make certain the ink had not faded. Why do you keep it in a box? Thalia asked. So that it will remain after I am gone. Will people believe it? Some will. Is that enough? Linus remembered Medusa's tired voice in the field. He remembered how carefully she had walked away before sunrise. It is a beginning, he said. That night, Milo did not play at fighting Medusa. Instead, he placed one of his smooth stones beside the chest. It was a little gray stone with a white line through its center. For her garden, he said. Linus smiled. The stone remained there for many years. It was not a monument to a monster. It was a gift for someone who had been misunderstood. Chapter 12. The Keeper's Hidden Scroll. High above the distant city, the temple garden had changed. The olive trees had grown larger. Their trunks were thick and twisted. Their roots had lifted several stones from the path. The fountain still stood in the center of the garden. Part of its rim was broken, where a guard's spear had struck it long ago. Moss had grown across the damaged place. Small white flowers now appeared there each spring. The old temple keeper Ianthe had died many years earlier. Before her death, she had placed several scrolls inside a clay jar. The jar was tall and narrow. It had a lid sealed with wax. Such jars were often used to protect grain from water and insects. Ianthe had used this one to protect something more fragile than grain. She had used it to protect a voice. Ianthe placed the jar beneath a loose stone in the library floor. She did this because the leaders of the city had ordered the keepers to destroy every kind account of Medusa. They wanted the official story to remain simple. According to that story, Medusa had been proud of her beauty. She had challenged divine power. She had entered the temple without respect. Her transformation had been a punishment, and her death had been a hero's victory. Ianthe knew that this story was incomplete. She had known Medusa. She remembered the young woman who swept the temple steps each morning. She remembered how Medusa carried damaged scrolls as carefully as wounded birds. She remembered the afternoon when Medusa found the false history of the Western sisters. Most of all, she remembered what Medusa had written in answer to it. That scroll was inside the jar. Many years after Ianthe's death, a new keeper came to the temple. Her name was Dione. Dione was a patient woman with dark brown skin and tightly braided hair. She had spent most of her life repairing old buildings. When she arrived, the library roof leaked whenever it rained. Several floor stones had cracked. Dust covered the shelves. Dione began her work slowly. First, she repaired the roof. Next, she cleaned the scroll shelves. Finally, she examined the floor. One afternoon, she noticed a loose stone near the back wall. The stone moved when she stepped on it. Dione knelt and lifted it. A small hollow lay beneath the floor. Inside the hollow was Ianthe's clay jar. Dione carried the jar to a table. She cleaned the dust from its surface. Then she studied the wax around the lid. A simple mark had been pressed into the wax. The mark showed a lamp with a small flame. Dione knew that symbol. It had belonged to Ianthe. Dione carefully warmed the wax and removed the lid. Several scrolls rested inside. Each had been wrapped in dry cloth. The cloth had protected them from dust and dampness. The first scroll described the rules used by the temple keepers. The second listed the names of women who had served in the library. The third was written in Ianthe's hand. It described Medusa. Ianthe wrote about Medusa's kindness, patience, and love of learning. She described the day of the transformation as honestly as she could. She admitted that she had not been in the garden. She refused to invent what she had not seen. However, she recorded what the guards had found. There had been one stone bird. There had been a broken fountain. There had been no wounded guard. There had been no attack. The fourth scroll was written in a different hand. Its letters were graceful and careful. At the top was a name, Medusa, daughter of Perseus and Stheno. Dione sat down. She read Medusa's account of her home. She read about the western shore, the stone house, the rosemary garden, and the 3 fishermen rescued from the sea. She read about Stheno carrying a tree trunk to repair their mast. She read about Euryale sewing the torn sail. Medusa's account did not sound like a defense. It sounded like a memory of home. Dione remained at the table until the room grew dark. Then she lit a lamp. The lamp was made from plain clay. Its shape was similar to the lamp Ianthe had once given Medusa. The small flames spread light across the scroll. Dione felt that someone was sitting quietly beside her. The city had called Medusa vain. Yet Medusa had written more about her sisters than herself. The city had called her cruel, yet she described saving people who had once feared her family. The city had called her dishonest, yet her account carefully separated what she knew from what she only believed. Dione read the scroll again. The next morning, she showed it to the temple leaders. Some were curious, others were angry. "This should remain hidden," one man said. "Why?" Dione asked. "It will confuse people. It may correct them. The old story has been told for generations." A story does not become true merely because it becomes old. The man looked toward the scroll. "The people honor Perseus. They may still honor his courage," Dione replied. "But courage does not require us to erase another life." The leaders argued for many days. Some wanted the scroll destroyed. Dione refused. She had been made keeper of the library. Her duty was to protect its records, not to protect one comfortable version of the past. At last, they agreed to let her make a copy. The original remained in the temple. The copy traveled with a merchant toward the coast. Another copy was carried to a school. A third was taken across the sea. Not everyone believed the account. Some accused Dione of inventing it. Others said the handwriting could not be Medusa's. Still, the words began to travel. The harsh story moved loudly through songs and public celebrations. Medusa's own account traveled quietly from hand to hand. It was not enough to change the whole world. It was enough to keep the truth alive. Chapter 13. The Return to the Island. Thalia never forgot the old blue cloak. After Linus died, the wooden chest passed to her. She kept it inside her home. Thalia had become a mapmaker. A map was a drawing that showed roads, rivers, coastlines, mountains, and towns. Sailors used maps to find safe passages across the sea. Thalia studied old travel records. Many of those records mentioned a hidden western island. Some said the island was surrounded by monsters. Others said it was guarded by mist. Nearly all of them warned sailors to stay away. Thalia wondered whether the island had been Medusa's final home. She did not wish to find treasure. She did not wish to become famous. She wanted to return the cloak. Before leaving, she prepared carefully. She packed bread, dried fruit, blankets, and fresh water. She also carried a small white flag. A white flag was a piece of plain cloth raised to show peaceful intent. It told strangers that the traveler had not come to fight. Thalia hired a boat from an experienced sailor named Evander. Evander was a broad-shouldered man with a calm voice. He had crossed the Western Sea many times, but he had never approached the hidden island. "My father warned me about that place," he said. "What did he tell you?" He said, "Stone people stand in the valley." "That may be true." He said, "Two immortal monsters guard them. They may be Medusa's sisters." Evander looked at the chest Thalia carried. "And you wish to meet them?" "I wish to return something that belongs to their family." Evander did not understand, but he respected her honesty. They traveled west. For several days, the weather remained calm. The sea was bright during the morning and purple in the evening. On the sixth day, mist appeared. It formed a pale wall across the water. Evander lowered the sail so the boat would move more slowly. Thalia tied the white flag to the mast. They entered the mist. The world became quiet. Water touched the sides of the boat with soft, regular sounds. The shoreline disappeared. Then Thalia heard singing. It was a low song without words. The sound came through the mist. A dark cliff slowly appeared. Evander nearly turned the boat around. Thalia placed her hand on the wooden chest. "We have come peacefully," she called. The singing stopped. A narrow channel opened between the rocks. White stones stood along its sides. Moss covered their surfaces, but carved letters could still be seen beneath it. Thalia asked Evander to bring the boat closer. Using a cloth and a little water, she cleaned the nearest stone. The words appeared, "Turn back." On the next stone she found, "No treasure waits here." On the final stone she uncovered, "Ellie." The island rest. "The stories never mentioned these warnings," Evander said. "They mentioned the statues," Thalia replied. "Warnings are less exciting." They guided the boat to the shore. Thalia stepped onto the island alone. She carried the chest in both arms. The valley was more beautiful than she had imagined. Long grass covered the ground. A stream moved beneath the trees. Flowers grew in large circles around silent stone figures. Several statues held weapons. One carried a net. Another held an open sack. A third wore the remains of a broken chain around his stone arms. Thalia understood. These people had not wandered into the valley by accident. They had come prepared to capture someone. She walked toward the cave. Stheno stood outside it. The immortal sister appeared tall and strong. Time had not aged her, but grief had changed the way she held herself. Euryale stood behind her. Small shells hung above the cave entrance. They moved in the breeze and made a gentle sound. Stheno looked at the chest. "You carry iron," she said. "The iron is only a lock. You carry wood. The wood is only a box. What is inside? Something Medusa gave to a child." At the sound of her sister's name, Euryale stepped forward. Thalia placed the chest on the grass. She opened it. The blue cloak lay inside. For a long time, neither sister spoke. Euryale knelt. She touched one repaired edge. "Our mother made this," she said. "My grandfather was Linus," Thalia explained. "Medusa found him alone beside a broken cart. She gave him the cloak." Stheno looked closely at Thalia. "The child lived?" "Yes." "He lived a long and peaceful life. Did he fear her, at first? And afterward?" "He remembered her kindness until his final day." Thalia removed the written account from the chest. "He wanted her family to know." Euryale accepted the page. She read the uneven letters. Tears filled her eyes. Stheno turned away and looked across the valley. For many years she had believed that nearly everyone had forgotten Medusa's goodness. Now, a stranger had crossed the sea to carry one small memory home. "Why did you come?" Stheno asked. "Because the cloak belonged here. You risked your life for an old piece of cloth." "It was not only cloth." Stheno looked at her again. This time her expression softened. "No," she said. "It was not. The sisters invited Thalia into the cave. The clay lamp still burned on a stone shelf. Beside it stood the wooden bird bowl and the bronze bell. Thalia recognized the bell from Linus's description. "May I ring it?" she asked. Euryale nodded. Thalia lifted the bell. Its clear voice filled the cave. Outside, birds rose from the trees. The sound traveled through the valley and crossed the mist. Stheno closed her eyes. For a moment, she could almost hear Medusa laughing beside the western sea. That evening, the sisters told Thalia about their childhood. They spoke of the stone house. They spoke of the broken-winged gull. They spoke of the fishermen, the village, and the jar of honey. Thalia listened carefully. She did not interrupt. She did not try to turn their memories into an adventure. When darkness covered the island, Euryale gave her a place to sleep near the lamp. Thalia rested beneath Medusa's blue cloak. For the first time in many years, it had returned to the family that made it. Chapter 14, The Book with Two Beginnings. Thalia remained on the island for 7 days. Each day had one purpose. On the first day, she listened. On the second, she visited the stone flowers. On the third, she cleaned the moss from the warning stones. On the fourth, she drew a map of the valley. On the fifth, she recorded the names of Medusa's serpents. On the sixth, she copied Linus's account beside the memories of Stheno and Euryale. On the seventh, she prepared to leave. Before her departure, Stheno gave her a small shell. The shell was pale pink and shaped like a curled leaf. One smooth hole had been made near its top. Medusa found this when she was a child, Stheno said. She believed that every shell carried part of the sea's voice. Thalia held it gently. "Why are you giving it to me?" "Because you listened." Euryale carried Medusa's bronze bell to the shore. "You should take this as well." Thalia shook her head. "It belongs here." "It once guided people through the fog," Euryale said. "Let it guide the story now." Thalia accepted the bell. She promised to protect it. Evander guided the boat away from the island. The sisters remained on the shore until the mist hid them. When Thalia returned home, she began writing a book. She called it The Book with Two Beginnings. The first beginning was the famous one. It told of Perseus receiving a mission from a king. It described the divine gifts, the hidden island, and the shield that served as a mirror. In that beginning, Medusa appeared only as the final danger. The second beginning opened beside the western sea. It described a stone house, a rosemary garden, and a mortal girl born between two immortal sisters. Thalia did not remove the frightening parts. She wrote about the gaze that turned living beings into stone. She described the armed people who entered the valley and never left it. She also described the warnings. She wrote that Medusa covered her eyes. She wrote that the statues had arrived with weapons, chains, nets, and empty treasure sacks. Thalia did not claim that fear was foolish. Medusa's power had been dangerous. Thalia asked a different question. Who had chosen to place that danger inside her? She also asked why the people with the most power escaped blame while the frightened woman carried all of it. Thalia worked for many years. She checked each memory carefully. When she did not know something, she wrote, "This is not known." When two accounts disagreed, she included both. When she added her own thoughts, she said they were her thoughts. This made the book slower than a heroic song. It also made it honest. At last, Thalia carried the finished work to the city. She went to the old temple library. Dione had also grown old, but she still cared for the scrolls. Thalia showed her Linus's account and the memories of Medusa's sisters. Dione showed Thalia the scroll hidden by Ianthe. The two women sat in silence after reading each other's records. They had traveled along different paths. Both paths had reached the same truth. Medusa had been more than the end of Perseus's task. Dione placed Medusa's own scroll beside Thalia's book. The accounts belong together, she said. For the first time, the library held Medusa's story from several voices. There was Medusa's voice. There was Ianthe's voice. There was Linus's voice. There were the voices of Stheno and Euryale. There was Thalia's careful record. No single voice knew everything. Together, they protected more truth than any one story could hold. The book was copied. Some readers rejected it. They said the old tale should not be changed. Thalia answered calmly, "The old tale remains. This book does not erase it. It restores what the old tale left outside." Some readers became angry. They believed that understanding Medusa would make Perseus less heroic. Thalia disagreed. A person's pain does not need to disappear so that another person can be brave. Children understood the new beginning more easily than many adults. They asked simple questions. Why had no one listened when Medusa warned the guards? Why did people enter her island with chains? Why did storytellers call her proud when they had never heard her speak? Why did they begin the tale only when the hero arrived? Adults often found those questions difficult. The children continued asking them. That was how the story began to change. Not through a great battle, not through a king's order. It changed because readers opened the book and discovered that it had two beginnings. Then they understood that it could also have two meanings. One was about a hero defeating a monster. The other was about what happened when the world decided that a wounded person was easier to fear than to understand. Both stories contained stone. Only one remembered the flowers. Chapter 15: The Last Voyage. West Dahlia became old. Her hair turned silver. Her steps became slow. She gave her maps to younger sailors and her books to careful students. The bronze bell remained beside her bed. One night, Thalia dreamed about the western shore. In the dream, Medusa stood beside a bowl of seeds. Her hair was golden. A white gull rested on her shoulder. Medusa did not speak. She pointed toward the sea. When Thalia woke, dawn had not yet come. She knew what she wished to do. She prepared for one final voyage. Milo, her brother, had also grown old. He came to help her pack. He still kept smooth stones, though the collection now filled several shelves. From a small cloth bag he removed the gray stone with the white line. He had placed it beside Linus's chest many years earlier. "Take this to Medusa's garden," he said. Thalia held it in her palm. For her flowers? For her. The journey was slower than before. A young sailor guided the boat. Thalia sat beneath a warm blanket and listened to the water. She carried 3 important objects. The first was Milo's stone. The second was a copy of The Book with Two Beginnings. The third was Medusa's bronze bell. The mist opened when the boat approached the island. Stheno and Euryale were waiting on the shore. Immortality had not changed their faces, yet they seemed gentler than when Thalia first met them. They welcomed her without questions. Thalia stayed in the cave. The blue cloak rested near the clay lamp. The wooden bird bowl stood outside, filled with seeds. Many birds visited it now. The sisters had learned to trust the valley's quiet creatures again. On the second morning, Thalia asked to visit the place where Medusa had slept during her final night. Euryale led her to the bed of moss. No mark remained there. Moss had continued growing. Flowers had entered through cracks in the stone. Time had softened the cave. Thalia placed the copy of her book beside the lamp. "This belongs here," she said. Stheno opened it. She read the first beginning, then she read the second. When she finished, she closed the book and rested her hand upon its cover. "You have written our sister as a person," Stheno said. She was one. That truth sounds simple. Simple truths are often the first to be buried. They carried Milo's stone into the valley. The flowers around the statues had spread across the grass. Many of the stone figures were covered with vines. Near the lake stood a small empty place. Thalia knelt and placed Milo's stone there. She planted white flowers around it. There was no statue. There was no weapon. The small stone did not mark a death. It marked a memory freely given. That evening, Thalia sat beside the lake with Stheno and Euryale. The sky became deep blue. Stars appeared above the cliffs. "Do you regret being immortal?" Thalia asked. Euryale considered the question. "Sometimes, because everyone else leaves? Yes." Stheno looked toward the cave. "But immortality also gives us time to remember." "Memory can become heavy," Thalia said. "It can." "Then why carry it?" "Because forgetting would leave Medusa alone inside the false story." Thalia understood. She had spent most of her life carrying the same memory, yet she had never carried it alone. Linus had carried one part. Ianthe had carried another. Dione had protected the written record. Medusa's sisters had protected the beginning. Every person held only a small piece. Together, the pieces became a path. On the final night of her visit, Thalia slept beneath the blue cloak. The cave was warm. The shells above her moved gently. The lamp burned with a steady flame. She dreamed again. This time, she stood beside the stone house at the western shore. Medusa was there. She seemed young, but not like a child. Her golden hair rested across her shoulders. She carried no sorrow in her face. "Did they remember?" Medusa asked. "Some did," Thalia replied. "Was it enough? I do not know." Medusa smiled. "That is an honest answer. I wanted everyone to understand. No story is heard by everyone." "Then what was the purpose?" Medusa lifted the wooden bowl. Several birds flew down. "The purpose was to leave the truth where someone kind might find it." Thalia listened to the birds. "I think more people will find it. Then you have done enough." When morning came, Thalia opened her eyes. Sunlight filled the cave. She felt peaceful. A few days later, she sailed home. The bronze bell remained on the island. Euryale hung it above the cave entrance. Whenever the wind entered the valley, the bell rang softly. It rang for Medusa, It rang for Linus. It rang for Ianthe, Dione, and Thalia. It rang for every person who had chosen to listen before judging. Chapter 16. The Girl at the Museum Door. Temper Sempers. Cities grew where villages had once stood. Roads crossed the old fields. The names of kings were written in books and later forgotten. The temple became a ruin. Parts of its roof fell. Grass grew between its steps. The library scrolls were moved to safer buildings. Thalia's book survived because many copies had been made. Some copies were lost in fires, some were damaged by water. A few remained. One copy eventually entered a museum. A museum was a quiet building where old objects were protected and studied. People visited it to learn about lives that had come before their own. The museum stood in a large city. Its walls were made from pale stone. Wide steps led to tall glass doors. Inside, gentle lights shone above statues, painted bowls, coins, and broken pieces of ancient buildings. Near the center of the museum was an exhibition about Perseus and Medusa. An exhibition was a group of objects arranged to explain a subject. The first object was a painted bowl. It showed Perseus turning his face away while holding a sword. The second object was a shield decorated with Medusa's head. The third was a stone carving of a frightening face surrounded by serpents. Visitors moved past the objects quickly. They read the labels. They saw the hero. They saw the monster. Near the end of the exhibition stood a small glass case. Inside it was an old book. The pages had become brown. Some letters were difficult to read. The label identified it as a later copy of the book with two beginnings. One afternoon, a girl stopped beside the case. Her name was Ilara. She was 11 years old. She had come to the museum with her school. Ilara had seen pictures of Medusa before. In every picture, Medusa looked angry or frightening. Her mouth was often open. Her serpents appeared ready to strike. Ilara read the label carefully. It explained that some ancient accounts described Medusa as a gorgon from birth, while a later account described a transformation. It also explained that storytellers had continued to reinterpret her meaning through the centuries. The label beside Thalia's book contained one short sentence. This work asks what Medusa's story might look like if it began before Perseus arrived. Ilara remained beside the case. Her teacher called the class toward the next room. Ilara raised her hand. "Can I ask a question?" "Of course." "Why do the stories begin with Perseus?" "Because his adventure was the main subject for many storytellers." "But Medusa was alive before he met her." "Yes." "Why was that part not important?" The teacher looked toward the painted bowl. Perhaps the people telling the story were more interested in the hero. Ilara considered this. Was Medusa the villain in her own story? The teacher did not answer immediately. "That depends on which version we read and whose point of view we follow." Ilara looked at the carved face. She tried to imagine the person before the carving. She imagined a child beside the sea. She imagined a bowl of seeds. She imagined a broken-winged bird held between careful hands. These scenes were not shown in the museum. Yet Ilara could see them clearly. When she returned home, she began writing. She did not write about a battle. She wrote about the first morning at the western shore. She described the sea, the stone house, and the rosemary garden. She wrote slowly because she wanted every place to feel real. Her mother found her working after dinner. "What are you writing?" she asked. "A story about Medusa. Is Perseus in it?" "Not yet. When does he appear?" "Near the end." Her mother smiled. "That is unusual." Ilara looked at the first page. "It is only unusual because people kept beginning too late." She continued writing. She did not pretend to know everything about Medusa's childhood. She clearly separated old myth from her imagination. Still, she gave the imagined child gentleness. She gave her sisters laughter. She gave her a mother who sang beside the sea and a father who worried because his youngest daughter was mortal. Most of all, she allowed Medusa to exist before anyone feared her. Ilara's story passed to another reader. That reader told someone else. Years later, a painter created a picture of young Medusa freeing a healed bird. A sculptor made a quiet statue of Medusa with closed eyes. A teacher asked students to compare different versions of the myth. A child pointed at the serpent-haired face on a shield and asked why a feared woman had also been used as a protector. The questions continued. The old story did not disappear. Perseus still entered the cave. The sword still fell. But the beginning grew longer. The space before the sword filled with family, memory, kindness, and choice. Medusa was no longer trapped inside one final moment. She became a child again. She became a sister. She became a student, a rescuer, a traveler, and a guardian. She became complicated. That was not as easy as calling her a villain. It was closer to the truth. Chapter 17. The Bell Beyond the Mist. Far beyond the roads of ordinary people, the western shore remained. The stone house had nearly disappeared. Only a low wall stood among the rosemary. Wind moved freely through the place where the door had once been. The sea still touched the rocks. The tide still filled the small pools. Silver fish still moved beneath the water, and red crabs still hid beneath pale shells. The hidden island also remained. Mist covered its cliffs during the morning. The valley rested quietly within them. Stheno cared for the warning stones. She cleaned away the moss whenever it grew too thick. Euryale filled the wooden bowl with seeds. The clay lamp still stood in the cave. The blue cloak rested beside it. Thalia's book remained on the stone shelf, protected by a wooden cover. Above the cave entrance hung the bronze bell. One evening, a storm crossed the sea. The wind entered the valley and moved through the shells. The bronze bell began to ring. Its sound was the same sound Medusa had heard as a young woman. It was the same sound Theron had given her after she helped repair his boat. It was the same sound Perseus had touched by accident in the cave. Now it carried no warning of attack. It guided no hero toward a victim. It simply rang through the darkness. Stheno and Euryale sat beside the lake. A white gull landed near them. Behind it came another gull, then another. Soon, many white birds rested along the shore. Euryale smiled. She would have liked this. Stheno nodded. She always did. The two sisters listened to the bell. They remembered Medusa's first morning. They remembered the moth on her blanket. They remembered teaching her to walk between them. They remembered her first word, home. For centuries, the world had taken Medusa's face and placed it on shields. It had used her fear as protection. It had used her pain as a weapon. It had repeated the moment of her death, until that moment seemed to contain her whole life. Yet no life can be held inside its ending. A person is also every morning that came before. Medusa was the day she fed the birds. She was the afternoon she carried a wounded gull. She was the evening she entered a bright village with hope. She was the quiet season she spent among scrolls. She was the night she guarded a frightened child. She was every warning she gave to people who would not listen. She was every flower she planted around the stone. The storytellers had called her dangerous. They were not entirely wrong. Her eyes held terrible power. But they had confused danger with cruelty. A storm is dangerous, but a storm does not hate. Deep water is dangerous, but deep water does not choose its victims. Medusa's power was dangerous. Her heart was not cruel. The storytellers had called her a monster. They were wrong about that. The word had allowed them to stop looking closely. It made the sword easier to celebrate. It made the stone figures easier to explain. It made the frightened woman easier to forget. But stories do not remain still forever. A story may seem as hard as stone. Then a question forms a small crack. Another voice enters. Light reaches the hidden place. Through that opening, rosemary begins to grow. A bird builds its nest. A child finds an old cloak. A keeper opens a clay jar. A reader discovers that there was always another beginning. The bell continued to ring. Its voice crossed the valley. It passed through the mist. It moved over the dark western sea. No one in the distant cities heard it with their ears. Still, some people felt its call. They opened old books. They looked again at familiar pictures. They asked who had been permitted to speak and who had been turned into silence. They wondered whether the villain in a hero's story might have been the wounded heart of another story. Each question carried Medusa farther from the cave where her tale had once ended. At last, the wind became calm. The bell gave one final note. Stheno rose and placed more seeds in the wooden bowl. Euryale lit the clay lamp. The gulls rested safely beside the lake. Above the island, the stars shone through the clearing mist. The world beyond the cliffs still contained harsh versions of Medusa's story. Perhaps it always would, but those were no longer the only versions. The truth had found listeners. The innocent child had not been forgotten. And somewhere beneath every picture of the monster, there now waited the memory of a little girl beside the sea. She was holding out her hands. A wounded bird rested between them. Her eyes were gentle. Her heart was open. She did not yet know what the world would call her. She knew only what she wished to be. A helper, a sister, a guardian, a safe light beside dangerous water. That was Medusa before the stone. That was Medusa beneath the stories. And at last, when the bell's fading voice reached the edge of the night, the world began to remember her from the beginning. The end.